Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so I am coming on to not necessarily make a video. We'll see if I feel inspired to go into like I'm in a video mode. I just got back from the gym. I'm not wearing any makeup, and I'm like, maybe I'll just make a recording because, anyways, I wanted to kind of make a special like evolutionary astrology or like really deepen into the moment kind of transmission for you because we're moving into some really big energy. And I thought because the first bit of the big energy is Saturn moving into Pisces, and on the day of the Virgo new moon, like within an hour of each other, which is significant. Um, and then later in the month, we have Mars finally leaving Gemini, which is significant for our personal lives. And then on the 23rd, we have Pluto ingressing finally into Aquarius, which is just another gigantic moment for the collective. And so instead of doing a transmission that covers all of that, I thought I'd kind of break it up. So I'm going to start with the full moon, and then we'll talk about Saturn moving into Pisces and how that's significant for us. So beginning with the sorry, my microphone, here we go. Beginning with Saturn, the full moon. So what the full moon does is helps us to come into the dimension of reality that is polarity, right? So the full moon is always when the moon is sitting opposite from the sun in the zodiac. And part of why I feel so inspired, I think, to talk about this full moon in depth is because this is the part of my own chart where I have my nodal axis. And so everybody in their chart has a nodal axis. The nodal axis tells us in our own chart, depending on where it is, what polarity we will be working with in this lifetime. And so the nodal axis glyph is the little horseshoes in your chart. In fact, if let's say we were doing a video, let's show you what the glyph is so that you can see that then in your own chart when you pull it up. So everyone has their own nodal axis in the chart, and they are these two little horseshoes. So if you see the mouse here, that sit directly across from each other. And so mine happened to be in Pisces and Virgo, which is the axis point this full moon deals with. And from an evolutionary perspective, wherever our own nodes are in our chart, it talks to us about the dimension of reality we'll be exploring like really in depth in this lifetime. And it's a dimension of reality that is polarized, right? So like there's an opposite, and oppositions in astrology always talk about how do we integrate something? How do we bring two opposite things into relationship with each other? And so what I thought I might do just is talk a little bit about the different axes so that you can look in your chart and see where your nodal axes are, and a little bit about the evolutionary themes you'll be diving into in this lifetime. And it'll also help you understand, I think, the zodiac a little better if I talk just for a minute or so on each zodiac polarity. And then we'll go into, because Pisces, Virgo, we'll do that one last, and then we'll go into the full moon. So let's begin then with Aries and Libra. So Aries and Libra, if your nodal axis is in Aries and Libra, what you're dealing with kind of in this lifetime is the idea of Aries is like the essence self, that I am principle, like just me. Who am I? without additions or subtractions. And then Libra, across from Aries, deals with other, right? And like the world of projections, like how we project that I am essence then out onto the world. And then how do we cope and be in relationship with other people in a world that is like where we're constantly being mirrored, and having that mirroring principle back to us. So there's like a really deep evolutionary work of like being able to kind of hold the rod of that I am self, that I am essence, which is what we're dealing with this month with Venus in the solar plexus, part of her journey. And then so the evolutionary purpose then of this axis is like, how do I bring that essence out in relationship, hold it in a beautiful way that balances both not getting lost in like codependency and projections and hall of mirror type dynamics, but that's also deeply honoring of the other person's essence, the I am essence. So that's the kind of like evolutionary purpose of the Aries Libra axis. So then we move then to the Taurus Scorpio axis, which is where we are now, is the Taurus Scorpio axis. So the nodes in the sky are dealing with Taurus and Scorpio themes. And just like Aries and Libra, they are also ruled by Mars and Venus. And so Libra talks to us all about the idea of accumulation and building. And it's like Taurus is like the garden of life, where there is abundance, nurturance. It's where we start to build the values of our own life, like really like come into understanding what our own personal values are around ourself. So it's not necessarily values out in the world, but it's values for the self. And then what Scorpio does is, and it's also, Taurus is also where we begin to form attachments, right? Like where we begin to like things and become attached to them. And so Scorpio then is the opposite of that. It's like, where is the purging? So Taurus is accumulation, Scorpio is purging. It's the ability to be the phoenix and to be severed from our attachments, but not have us taken out. It's that place of death and rebirth where we have ego deaths. And, I think the most important kind of evolutionary theme there is this attachment and detachment. From an evolutionary perspective. There's other things that the zodiac signs mean, but it's like when the nodes are there, it's asking us like, what are we here to explore in this lifetime? Like what karmic thing are we here to resolve by playing on both sides of these polarities? So if you're the Taurus Scorpio axis, then you're playing with like being deeply attached and needing to build and nurture your life and come into relationship with your own values, and then potentially suddenly, or maybe not so suddenly, have those kind of attachments and values and things that you've built stripped away, and then begin that process again and again and again and again. So it's a very deep and mystical axis because death is involved, and it brings us into like our first initiation really with death and the mystery. So then moving on, we have the Gemini Sagittarius axis, and that's ruled by Mercury and Jupiter. And this is really the axis of truth in the chart. And so people who have this evolutionary axis in their chart are really concerned with like what is the truth of life? And they are balancing on the Jupiterian side, like the spiritual, the philosophical, the needing to have lots and lots of different experiences and to like bump up against lots of things. This can be considered kind of like the rock tumbler principle of life, where, when we shine rocks and polish them, we are bumping them up with grit and tumbling them around with other rocks. having lots and lots of experiences, making mistakes, and then Gemini is also that same thing. It's like the sign of the multiplicity, but it's more mental and intellectual. And so it's sort of like, then how do we thread through all those Jupiterian experiences and bring them out into the mundane world? How do we speak truth in the face of the collective? That's kind of the evolutionary theme. So if you are somebody who has this axis in your chart, for the nodes, you're really concerned this lifetime with, like, what is the truth? What is the truth of this dimension? What is the truth of my life? What is the truth of the collective? It's just it's it's like, and how do I bring those things into relationship? How do I be with the truth of something and sort of function in the world, which is important. Like sometimes we find out radical truths that are like a hit to our system. They're not easily integrated. And the Gemini part of that is like, how do I then be a vessel for truth in the world? How do I bring that into my body, bring it into my life, and then also be the carrier of it? Because Gemini in and of itself has this like trickster quality where he breaks up calcifications and ossifications in the collective. That's like what the trickster does. It's here to sort of shake things up to get us out of the status quo. And so there is this it's such like a necessary for the evolution of the collective in general, this axis. And these are people who have this particular axis in the chart can be big players on the field and the world stage, because this is a concern that moves us forward in a practical way from an evolutionary perspective. Then you have the Cancer Capricorn axis, and this is ruled by the moon and Saturn, which are interesting bedfellows in a way. And this kind of really deals with the archetype of mother and father. Like, how are we in relationship to the principles that they carry? And so Saturn is like cold and, he sets limits. He's like an authority. He's the patriarch. He's disciplined. He's, the idea of winter or fallow ground, right? He brings us out to the threshold to like initiate us. And then Cancer is warm, and it's the sign of like the great mother and that like all accepting, unconditional love. And it feels like home. It feels like safety. And so people who have this theme are being deeply initiated in the realm of love. Like how do I hold the rod of self-love for myself, like for me, and for then everyone like in my family, or that I am in the archetypal role of mother for, in the face of coldness, like in the face of insecurity, in the face of not knowing. It's the axis where we have to come into relationship with trusting the deeper thing to hold us when it doesn't appear like there is a net, right? So it's like coming into relationship with a deeper source of love. And by that, I mean like when we go through those dark, cold periods that seem barren and like we're in the boneyard, how do we reconnect ourselves to a living source of love in the world? And then how do we, from an evolutionary perspective, then embody that so that we can be a representative for that type of thing on Earth? And so we can see as we move through these axes that they don't necessarily have a pattern, in that there are some lives that we come into, like if we like the idea of reincarnation, like if that's kind of a cosmology we ascribe to, there's this kind of sense that some lives are for dealing with like personal karma, and some lives are lives that are like in service. Your life is here to be in service to the collective in a sense. And so we can see going through these axes that some seem more personal. The moon is a deeply personal sign, right? And so is Mars and Venus. Like they're more personal. And then Saturn and Jupiter and some of the outer planets, they're more concerned with like what's going on a collective or transpersonal level. The moon Saturn axis, the Capricorn Cancer axis is really important for the collective. So it's like a deeply personal life, but it's important for the collective in the sense that these are the people who bring love like into the boardroom, into the cold places. So they're really important for collective evolution. They bring love like into the political arena and into some of the hierarchies and structures that hold our world in place. You know, they are the people who climb the mountain and plant the flag of love at the top of it after a long, isolating, cold journey. So that's kind of how that axis works, because the moon, while it's deeply personal, Saturn is a sign that of course has very personal lessons for us about trust and being able to open to love in the places that seem like we should be contracting. But he's also a sign of he's a social planet. Jupiter and Saturn are social planets. So they point to something in the collective. So then we have the Leo Aquarius axis, and Leo and Aquarius is a really interesting sign because it you know, this life is about for people who have this in their chart, like the deep radiant heart of myself against or versus the collective. Like that's the polarity. So Aquarius is the sign of community, like greater community groups, the collective, you know, how we move as one organism, as a group of people. It's kind of like the humanitarian. It's an idealistic sign. And then you've got Leo, who's the radiant heart of the king. So he's like the radiant heart of the one. And so, you know, this life for people who have this access is about like, how do I show up in my own, it's very similar to Aries Libra. Aries Libra is about self and other, like one other, like in relationship to that one person who ends up kind of like being your mirror. So our immediate family. Aquarius Leo is more about like, how do I show up and be the rod of divine will, which is sort of what we're dealing with in the solar plexus here, and shine my light and have the capacity to be seen in my most innocent, playful, joyful self without getting sucked in to the collective. But then there's also the question, as we're holding the polarity there, like, how do I be in service to the collective then without getting lost? Because there is this piece about the collective. Aquarius in modern astrology is ruled by Uranus, which is all about individuation. And so this is kind of that axis that speaks to that greater phenomenon of like, how do I individuate in the face of culture versus how do I individuate, or how do I like bring my full self into intimate relationships? And so that's big work. I mean, it's really, a lot of us carry a lot of deep wounds around being fully seen. And this evolutionary axis is about allowing like the deepest, most vulnerable places be seen by a larger group. And it carries, in a sense, like a different harmonic, but a similar tone to the Capricorn Cancer axis, in a sense, because Leo is also a luminary. So it's about bringing light, shining a light on something. And both Capricorn and Aquarius are about the collective. They're both ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is a Saturn ruled sign. in traditional astrology, Uranus in modern astrology, but both speaking to this idea of like, and Leo is the sign of the radiant king. You know, we can think of Jesus as a Leonine archetype in a sense, because he was one of the solar kings, you know, with the big radiant heart that wanted the best for everyone in his kingdom. And so it's that balancing principle between putting ourselves in the shoes of everybody, having empathy for the collective and the collective suffering. And then like, how do we bring life and light into those places ourselves? And the only way to do that is really to be fully ourselves. Okay, so that little trip there brings us then to the Virgo Pisces axis, which is where our full moon will be on the 7th. And this axis is the one that I was born in. I've got my North Node, which talks to us kind of about like the area we haven't quite mastered yet in Virgo, and my South Node in Pisces. The South Node speaks to us about themes that we've probably mastered pretty well, and like how we're going to enter that rock tumbler, right, in life, and be polished so that we've really come to understand the lesson. So the North Node is where we kind of get knocked around in our charts. The South Node looks like an upside down cup, the glyph for the South Node, that area where we have some mastery. The area where we're being refined by life from an evolutionary perspective is the North Node. So that's the upside down cup. So I look at it like the South Node is the cup that's already full. Like that's where we have mastery. And the North Node is the cup that it's difficult to fill in this lifetime because we don't quite have mastery there yet. We're still getting the lessons. So you can pull your own chart and look for where these glyphs are, where the nodes are across from each other. And if you need help with that, let me know. I'll make sure you get a chart where you can see these glyphs. Anyhow, so this is a really deeply mystical configuration or polarity, because Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. And so it's kind of thought to be the sign of completion, where the dissolution of everything that we've learned on our many soul journeys happens. And Virgo is about refinement. It's about building a certain kind of mastery. It's about discernment. Pisces is like chaos. It's like the void. It's like the abyss where there's no real structure or outline. It is the mystical realm. It's the realm outside of this realm. It doesn't even really exist in this dimension. It's kind of speaks to us about how the what exists beyond the veil, how it interacts with this 3D world, with the matrix, right? And so, you know, the Piscean archetype is kind of like a person who's got one foot in this realm and then one foot in another realm. And then the Virgoan archetype is how do we bring the divine into density? Like, how do we embody divinity? How do we bring spirit into matter? And the Virgoan archetype is deeply concerned with the body, with health, with our system, like the different systems of our body and them working well. There's this sense of like refinement and purification in Virgo. It's concerned with health and healing, with service. And so, you know, the Virgoan person is, in a sense, it's like a weaver. It's like taking from the void, like just threads, any kind of thread that comes through. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, but in modern astrology by Neptune, which is very much like, like different dimension. Like there's a very mystical thread with both of those signs. Like, so how do we bring through the mystical and weave it into the mundane? And so if we remember, our Sagittarius archetype was more dealing with the truth of the collective and like the truth of like the bigger thing that we see here. Pisces is about taking the truly unknown, the true mystery, the true like undefinable thing, and threading it through into the 3D mundane reality. And so the person that's got a Virgoan kind of archetype in them is going to be working to balance like what is spirituality in the face of living every day. And there's this kind of interesting website on or page on Facebook that I like. It's called Healing from Healing. And I think that that really embodies the lesson of this this evolutionary line here really well. And so what it talks about is like not going too far off the edge into like new age spirituality or getting too taken away or too pulled down a river with spirituality stuff. Like from an Ayurvedic perspective, we might call that like becoming too vata. Like there's too much wind, there's too much air, there's not enough grounding, there's not enough being part of reality. And so this Healing from Healing place is just, it's a really great page because it tends to poke fun at and just the right amount, like using kind of mockery and poking fun and humor and levity to like make sure that we don't get too out of balance with our healing and spirituality pursuits, but that we're able to really ground them into the world. Virgo is also the home. So thus, having said all that, it's the home of discernment. Like, how do we bring discernment for our lives like into being? It's ruled by Mercury, but it's a feminine earth sign. And so it's got this kind of drive or capacity to move towards organization. It's ruled by the priestess, the virgin priestess. So she's self-contained, which is very beautiful. She's like, it's not like her emotions are chaotic and spilling. It's like she's able to contain herself. And then there's that like function of separating the wheat from the chaff. And so Virgos are like deep seers. They're able to have the sight from Pisces and then zero in on it with precision in their everyday lives, like here on the earth plane. And so people who have a strong Virgoan archetype in their chart tend to be able to kind of pan the collective or pan the paradigm or whatever and pull out distortions and be able to kind of align with a greater higher truth in like a distortion or an inversion. They're also healers, and the people who are Virgoan are really in service. Like this lifetime is about being of greater service to a bigger thing, something that's bigger than them. And there's a lot of sacrifice involved in the Virgoan archetype. And so like the shadow, if you have a lot of Virgo, or like with the full moon here this month, our opportunities to look at like, where do we overdo the service piece? And it becomes, it almost is like, has a tinge of slavery to it, and not because anybody else is enslaving us, but because our own inability to say no and to have boundaries. It's like the Pisces bit is bleeding in to the Virgo, and so it creates this shadow of like the victim, martyr, savior. And so it's this opportunity to really look this month at like, where am I not boundaried in appropriate ways? Where am I bleeding out my life force to something that isn't feeding me in the same way. And the other thing that we really get to look at then, because then what can happen in the shadow of Pisces is we get too grabby. There becomes this like controlling thing. Like think about the archetype of the savior who thinks that they can rescue everybody, and they become this rescuer, and they are in a sense stealing the life and karmic lessons from other people by solving their problems for them. And so I tend to think this is a, like, if we have spiritual sins, if there is even such a thing as that, but like taking a lesson from somebody else, like not allowing them to have the experience of being tumbled and polished is a sin in a sense, and this is like a really deep shadow of Virgo, is to not know how to hold loving space for other people, but instead, like while they work through their own stuff, but instead going in and actually rescuing them from what they needed. It doesn't allow them to build their own muscles in the world and their own sense of resilience. And so, like, if we do this a lot with our children, they become adults who really have no idea how to adult because we've stepped in and we have handicapped them or incapacitated them, because we didn't allow them to be polished. And this is a deep shadow of Virgo. And I know that, I have to watch myself. I don't have a sun in Virgo, but I've got my nodes in the sign, and I've also got both Jupiter and Saturn. And so it's a sign that's like heavily weighted for me. And I really need to watch, like, I've had to go in and clear out, like, where am I in victimhood? And the victim is interesting because he gets in the West sort of a bad rap. It depends what side of the political polarity you're on. Like one side seems to be almost overindulgent to the victim archetype, where the other side is like way too hard on the victim archetype. The victim, just like every single archetype of the Zodiac, is part of our humanity. And so it needs to be integrated. And so the idea that the victim might be part of the shadow of Virgo isn't about getting rid of it. It's about having compassion for it and integrating it where it's true, because there are places in our lives where we are just sincerely the victim of something random and horrible happening, right? And so, like, being able to have compassion for ourselves where something well and truly stinks and sucks, but not tipping over into that place where the victim gets out of alignment is when it hooks for attention, when it hooks to keep itself disempowered, in a sense. That's where the victim gets problematic. And so, yeah, it's about kind of watching that. And the other, like, big evolutionary lesson then for this particular axis, and then also what we will be getting when we have Saturn and Pisces, is this kind of like idea that really nothing is in our control. It's like we're all going to now be initiated in the cosmic joke of, like, really how much is in our control. And I always kind of like really get the like deep haunting sense of this when, like, the power goes out and we then lose internet as well. And then all of a sudden I'm like, so much of my life in it running smoothly is dependent on, like, this one thing. And in reality, nothing's a guarantee. And so we get initiated, and especially with Saturn then in Pisces, we get initiated into this idea of, like, what really matters in the world. Like, what is the deeper thing? Like, where should we really be focusing our energy? Because while we're all out here trying to, like, build our legacy or our businesses, or we're doing kind of potentially spiritual entrepreneurship or service, it's like at the end of the day, when everything gets stripped away and we get to come face to face with what really matters, and we remember that it's, at the end of the day, it's love, it's the It's the people who have shown up and invested in our lives that we've invested in. Or that kind of like sense when you have a fire in your house and you lose everything and all of your possessions are gone. And then, that's kind of a scorpionic, the Virgo, Pisces, Taurus, Scorpio axes, they're they're similar. They, again, like we said, the Capricorn Aquarius, it's like they're a different harmonic of the same tone. It's like very similar in that sense. Scorpio initiates us into the death right, and then Pisces initiates us into the death realm. So one is bringing us to the experience of an actual thing, and the other is bringing us to living in that place of like, what is it like to experience life after death, and what is the really deeper thing and the more mystical thing about this, about this world, about reality. And so Saturn is and Pisces are so like really different bedfellows. Like we said, Saturn is concerned with like discipline and limits and authority. And like, he's really beautiful in helping us build something, because like we said, when we did this, when we looked at Saturn earlier, we saw how he really is the architect, and he helps us build something quality, and he helps us build it by saying, no, that's not true. So you can't do that right now. You have to wait, go back, chop more wood, carry more water, right? And so Saturn is bringing that energy of structure and discipline and chopping wood and carrying water into the liminal void, which is just interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic. And so what I think is that we'll see a lot of really sobering energy come online in the collective. So the kind of shadow side of Pisces is, like we said, getting lost in that kind of like new age, really not being in touch with reality. It's the realm of addiction and like where we can get sucked into the hungry ghost. And then so Saturn brings this like dimension of like, this is real, face reality into that place. And what's interesting is like Alcoholics Anonymous was founded when Saturn was in Pisces. And so that makes sense. So we may have a really sobering, confronting time. Saturn, or Pisces, is always also the last sign of the zodiac. And so Saturn is completing a 30-year cycle here. And so it's like, what in our own lives is coming to, like, what major cycle, big, long 30-year cycle is coming to completion right now? What's dissolving? What things are falling away? And Saturn really is, he's going to plow through this area that can be very tied to illusion, delusion, dissociation, hungry ghost, and he's going to bring in a reality check here. And so part of me is really excited for this energy, because I really love the idea of a grounded spirituality and being grounded even in the deeply mystical places. I think some like a key word for this place, or this placement of the next 3 years, from an evolutionary perspective, what are we going to be asked to do? We're going to see the paradox come alive, that we can ground in the groundless places, that when we let go and surrender to the bigger, a deep degree of safety in that ability to trust. It is a lot like the root chakra of our Venus journey is really like bringing in trust to the liminal realms, to the realms where things don't make sense, where things feel irrational or chaotic, undefined, the unknown, the deep, deep mystery of our lives, like bringing in, a truth check, like a reality check. Where is this out of alignment? Where are you bringing through distortion and illusion and dissociation into your lives. And that's causing you to live in a way that is untrue and out of alignment. That's like deep Saturn work. And so for me, I love that. But when we work with Saturn, like a lot of people are deeply worried about working with Saturn, in that Saturn is like the daddy, it's like the cosmic daddy who smacks you over the head when you've done something wrong. And so it's about coming into right relationship with that energy of, you know, when the universe says no, when daddy says, no, there's a limit here. You can't run out into the street, or you get your hand smacked for going to touch the stove. And how do you react to that? A lot of us still have like a deeply, I don't want to call it immature. We can though, like immature response to authority in our lives, in that we don't listen, we don't respect the authority. We want to plow through, or we get angry that the authority has come down on us and that we're being asked to listen or to submit to something bigger than we are. You know, in our hyper kind of individualized Western society where we are the power and we should, you know, have control and be able to do what we want. And we've really our um built our psyches around that idea. Like you can do, be, and have anything you want to, but like that's just not true, right? That's a selling point of the American dream. But the truth is much more complicated and complex than that. And so Saturn's going to be initiating us into like really being with the deeper truth behind like how there is a true partnership. There's a true source of life. There is a true mystical generator to this whole machine that we live inside of, that is partnering with all of us. Pisces is the one, right? So it's the way that we are all held together. And so I'm wondering with Saturn and Pisces, like, is the sense of separation going to become more and more and more stark, so that it perpetuates finally the understanding of how connected we are? Because I think that you've got to break that illusion. And the only way to break it sometimes is to pull it out completely to the extreme, just like the pendulum, you know, like pull the pendulum out as far as possible, so that the people who don't really understand how connected we are, how fractal we are, how we are each a part of a deep divine spark of life, and that, you know, like that kind of quality of namaste, like bringing that into the world. I wonder if that kind of thing is going to happen with Saturn and Pisces. But yeah, it's going to be a very, very, I think, deep time. I think the next 3 years are going to have a lot of come to Jesus moments. Pisces is the realm, the Piscean age is like the realm of Christianity, or the age of Christianity and Christ consciousness. And so Saturn's going to be bringing in a deep dose of truth and reconciliation here around those themes. There'll be a dissolution of the stuff that isn't true for us in our lives, the things that aren't spiritually aligned. There'll be an ask around grounding our divinity. There'll be an ask around bringing the dichotomy between bringing structure to places that are soupy and swampy for us, like places that we are just like in the swamplands, especially like with our feminine, or we get too yin. So there'll be that ask by Saturn, but then there'll also probably be the dissolution of structures and things that aren't true, like back into the void, like sending them back on their way, giving them a death right, allowing them to dissolve and be swept out with the tide. So I think, let's see, I've probably spoken for quite a while. let me look. I had made some notes beforehand. I think I've mostly covered them, but we went over the what is really important, that Saturn in Pisces is sobering. It's a place of disillusion. It is the place, you know, that Pisces is associated with addiction, and addiction is associated with the hungry ghost. And so I think that Saturn will also bring like a whopping degree of reality and contraction. So like cutting off the areas in which we overconsume to fill the empty places within us, both on a personal level and on the level of the collective. So, you know, where our consumer is out of control, not just money wise, just like any place we're over consuming. We can over consume astrology, we can over consume spirituality, we can over consume anything, you know, exercise, dieting. There's just any place that we are off gassing or offloading energy in excess to kind of keep us distracted from the deeper thing that we need to feel, is something that like a Saturn in Pisces will come in and help us to get in right relationship with, because that's essentially Saturn. Saturn is like this idea of really rightness, right relationship, like what is right and good and true from a perspective of realness. Like we understand, if we are connected to the body and connected to a sense of spirituality, we understand when we look at something what is right and wrong. And you know, on both sides of the political spectrum, there's a distortion of that in one way or another. We can generally find the truth more like kind of in the center, you know, in the balance point of the polarities. And but there is definitely a right and wrong. And one of the shadows of Pisces can be like over spiritualizing, like we said, and saying things like, it's all relative, or like love is all you need, or having that really kind of hippie mentality where everything is permissible because you know, we're all one, and in the end it's all fine. And Saturn, I think, is going to help us redefine our values in that sense, where we've gotten to lax and indefinable and distorted and out of alignment and in illusion. You know, some of the left's, like the far extreme left's ideas, to me at this point have gotten very soupy or very swampy, where they're like indefinable. Like, what are the real values there? And are they grounded and based in actual truth, or are they grounded and based in kind of like this seeming love soup that really isn't grounded in any kind of real moral or value? So I think we're going to see a lot of that energy in the next 3 years, both hopefully in the collective. So it's like a reckoning on like what our collective values are. And then in our own lives, like where have we not been in alignment with our values, our morals, our traditions, like the kind of tradition matters, you know, it's part of our lineage. Capricorn, Saturn is related to our ancestry and our lineage, and like how do we bring forward those threads of our being and like gift them then to the next 7 generations. And so, you know, when we get to involved in pop culture and like, you know, internet stuff, and we're not really focused on like, what are the traditions of my own family? What am I gifting to my children? What of my own wisdom stream are my children or grandchildren or people just in my field getting from me? Like, what am I weaving here of my own ancestry is going to be another important theme. Think about like bringing through from the void something tangible and something real and leaving a legacy. This is all Saturn and Pisces work. So very good. This covered then, this transmission covered our nodal axes in our chart. I went through all of them. If you need a chart or need to know what your nodal axis is, please let me know after you've listened to this so that you can find out kind of like what your evolutionary work is in this lifetime. I did a very quick synopsis. Of course, I'm always available for sessions if you want to go through that more deeply. Then we covered the Scorpio Virgo axis in depth and the Virgoan archetype and how it's the archetype of the priestess, but in the shadow expression, it can be over service, victim, martyr, savior, rescuer. And that's the polarity of this full moon. And so those are the themes that in the immediate we'll be working with. And then we spoke about Saturn moving into Pisces and bringing a deep dose of reality into the mystical realms, and really how he's going to help us ground mystical and spiritual things into reality and bring a sense of sobering and dissolution and completion to the collective. So if you have any questions, I'm always available for them. Okay. All right. It was so great to meet with you guys.